So I wanted to welcome everybody in the room here and online. Today we're going to be talking about winter bike commuting. And Casey has been generous enough to share her time and expertise with us. And she's from the Hub Bike Co-op. I saw her do a similar presentation last fall at the Midwest Mountaineering Adventure Expo, and that was a great presentation. So I tried my best to get her over here to educate all of us. She'll be talking about gear. She's got some examples of bikes. She's got examples of clothing, layering, that kind of thing. So without further ado, Casey.
Thanks, Owen.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing me in. As Owen said, my name is Casey. I am originally from Fargo, North Dakota. Some friends and I co-founded a nonprofit bike shop there called the FM Community Bicycle Workshop. We did a lot of winter riding seminars. A lot of folks were using bikes to commute year-round, both for pleasure and necessity. And so we opened that shop in about 2007. So had a lot of fun experiences in different places, biking, mostly flat, but I did live in Montana for about 3 years in Glacier and got some hills in and some mountains. So I'm happy to answer any questions. We'll leave some time at the end. The main introduction and overview that I usually try to go through is just covering a few topics on bikes and setups, what kind of bikes can be good options for winter bikes, how to take your existing bike and make some modifications, going over some gear, accessories, tools, and supplies just to make cycling a little more accessible. Winter maintenance. So winter maintenance is just like summer, only more often, and often, being a little more diligent about cleaning, lubing, and checking for corrosion. And I did bring some examples of different winter lubes that we use, that we switch over to. So just a few different materials that we use in the winter and some frame saver and stuff like that. Some riding techniques, so handling, safety, things to keep in mind when you're on icy, slushy roads. Layering, so clothing options for commutes, especially if you're going to work and you want to dress nice when you get there. How do we make that work and keep yourself safe? And then nutrition and hydration. So unless anybody has questions before we get started, I'll kind of go in that order. Sound good?
Good.
Okay. Actually, before we get started, does anybody have sort of something that I didn't mention that they're looking to get out of this, or have any questions that I didn't cover? Okay, we'll see how we do. Almost any bike can be a winter bike. I have two very different examples here. These are both my commuter bikes that I use in the winter. The Kabuki is the first bike that I ever built up. I converted it into a fixed gear specifically to ride in the winter. So this is just a very simple road bike that used to be multi-speed that I converted into a single speed. The rear wheel is a flip-flop hub. I have two rings in the front, and that's because I have a winter gear ratio and a summer gear ratio. When you're riding in the winter, you're going to want to be able to have a little bit lower gearing. And so what I usually recommend is in the summer I tend to ride around like a 52-16, and then in the winter I do a 42-18. And what that means is I'm dropping down to the smaller ring in the front, which is a 42 tooth cock or chain ring, and then usually going with like a 16 to an 18 in the back. That just means that if I'm pedaling through a lot of thick snow or a snow bank, that lower gear ratio allows me to keep pedaling and get through it without stalling out. It's also a little easier on your knees. And then the tires are studded. So what that does is usually helps with ice. It'll give you a lot more traction. We're going to get into tires and gear later. But I do recommend carbide tip studs because they last a little bit longer, don't wear down as much. And currently I do have drop bars. This is what I've always used in winter, just something that I'm comfortable with. I am now 6 months pregnant. I will be putting some higher rise bars on here for the amount of time I have left to do some winter riding. And I would also recommend that if people want to get a little more visibility at intersections where you can see over snowbanks, you're wearing a lot of bulky winter gear in the winter, so sometimes it can be a lot harder to get that mobility to look behind you. So having a more upright bike can be really beneficial for your lines of sight. And then I just have a clip-on fender in the back that usually keeps me dry while I'm riding. And these tires don't tend to spray up too much, so I don't really worry about the front fender on this one. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about like a fixed gear road style winter bike? Sure.
So you mentioned it sounds like switching both the front and rear for winter, like to a 4218. Like if I have a 4816 now, would you just switch the front or?
It's usually easiest if you don't have a double. This is a conversion, so I just kept it on. If you have a single setup, then you're just going to want to put a different cog on the back.
Oh, just the back. Okay.
Yep, you can use that to change the ratio.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
Keep a 48 up front is okay.
You know, I would try it. It's a little high, but I would just see how it feels, and then if you notice that you're spinning out and you're leaning forward, which is taking weight off the saddle, then I would switch it up a little bit. So the closer in size, the smaller that gear ratio, and the easier it's going to be to pedal. Yeah, maybe by 2 teeth, I would try. And then you had a question as well?
How does the fixed gear? Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
You go first.
I think we might have the same question. Like, is there, and I'm sorry if I missed, you said it before, but is there any advantage to having like a fixed gear versus just single speed?
Sure. So the advantage to both is that when you're running a single speed or a fixed gear, you have less moving parts to worry about. So some of the advantages are you're going to have less maintenance because you're not going to have derailleurs to worry about, extra housing and cables that can ice up and freeze. You don't have to worry about your gears jamming. And so it's also a little bit lighter and less to clean off. So often the salts that people use here in Minnesota do a number on bikes, and you will end up with some corrosion. As you can see, these bikes are not pristine, and I am a mechanic and I have access to all of the tools I need. And so they really do eat into the metals pretty quickly. And so a single speed or a fixed gear setup is very easy to replace. Fixed gear specifically gives me more contact, and I feel more control because I'm not hitting the brakes to slow down as much. I'm using my pedals to slow down. So that means I'm constantly engaging with the pedals and the drivetrain, which helps me feel a lot more stable on ice. Anytime you're hitting that brake, you are giving up a little bit of control. And so you can slide or coast a little bit. So I would say they're both good options. I prefer the fixed gear because I just feel like I have more control because I'm constantly engaging and sort of moderating my speed.
So what's the difference between fixed gear and single speed?
Sure, single speed allows
And
you
also
to
you mentioned a flip-flop
hub.
hub in the back.
Yeah. So the reason I like this hub is because it gives you both options, and they're pretty common. It just means that one side has threads for a single speed cog that will coast so that you can stop pedaling. And then the other side has threadings to put a fixed cog on. You need to have that thread because you have to put a lock ring on, otherwise you can spin that cog off. So if you're gonna try and run fixed and a single speed, you do need to have the correct rear wheel. If you just want to convert to a single speed and you have like a cassette rear hub, you can actually sell spacer kits so that you can just convert it to single a lot more easily. But I like this because it gives me the option. If I want to coast or turn this into a townie bike in the summer, or if I don't want to ride fixed in the winter, I can do that. When you're coasting is another time you have a little less control on ice because you're not engaging.
Makes sense.
Yeah, does that answer the question a little bit? Great. Lots of people, oh, you had one too.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Lots of people use multi-speed bikes for commuters in the winter. You all live in St. Paul, a lot of you, or at least you work here. You have more hills. And so multi-speeds can really come in handy if you do need to downshift to get up hills in the winter. It is a little more maintenance and a little more work, but if you want that range, it is nice to have some gears. And internally geared hubs are another way to have that without having to worry about derailleurs getting iced over on the outside. So that's another option.
And my question pertained, you mentioned hills. How does the fixed hub work on hills? And I realize, you know, it's the answer is probably going to be dependent upon the degree of the steepness of the hill. But do you find it difficult at times to do hills with the fixed hub?
In Seattle, yes. Here, a little, but that's why I go down to the lower gear in the winter.
Okay.
Not only does it help with ice and slush and snow, but it helps get up the hills. So it is a much easier gear ratio so that you can handle the hills. It means that you might go a little slower on the straightaways, but that's usually fine too in winter.
And would it be possible to build the bike in such a way where you only have a front derailleur, but you'd actually have to have so that you could switch to maybe see a granny gear in the front and just have the single cog in the back, but you'd have to have the tensioner to take up the chain. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's possible. That gets
tricky because it's such a big jump and it affects your chain line a little bit.
Oh, sure.
But you know, they also make 2-speed kickbacks. So there are some options if you just want a few gears.
Sure.
But with the front, it is a little more labor intensive, but I do have to manually add the link. So what I do is I pull a link in the winter and I store it. I either store it at home or I tuck it up into one of my handlebars. And then in the summer, I put the link back on and move it into the harder gear. So yeah, you could usually the chain tensioners don't give you that much extra room because your chain is cut to that size. But if you're using an old rear derailleur as your tensioner, it does have that flex. So you might be able to get away with it that way.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. So I think we covered, did anyone have any other questions about multi-speeds, internal or derailleur multi-speeds? That is what this fat bike is, so we could talk about both if we wanted, and I'm just going to spin these around so you can see the drivetrain. So this one does have gears. This is actually, I got this because it was fun, and it also was really nice. I used this last year as a transition season bike because you can ride your bike to work without snow, and it's fine. And then I don't know if you all remember the blizzard in April that we had this year. This bike had a snowdrift about 1 foot high. So I made it home. It took an hour. It normally takes me 10 minutes. I pushed 2 cars out of the road. I was the only moving vehicle. It felt great. I got a lot of cheers. So I was very proud of this bike. I did have to take the tire pressure down to about 5 psi. So you do need to let out quite a bit of air if you're going to ride something with a lot larger tires and have some traction, because this doesn't have studs. So when you are looking at, mountain bike tires or larger fat tires, you do want the knobs to be spread apart a little bit. That allows the snow to sort of fall out from those spaces and not clog up the tire itself. I had a blast. It was a very good workout. But this did a really good job. And so the nice thing about this bike is that, you could ride it to work in one condition and ride it home in a different. Whereas with the studs, if I ride it to work because it iced over or is snowing and kind of icy outside and then everything melts off in the evening, then I'm riding home with those studs on pavement, which isn't ideal. It wears them down a little bit faster, and it also is a little more slippery, actually, when you don't have that ice to bite into. So mountain bikes, old 26-inch mountain bikes, or modern ones as well. Fat bikes work really well for those transition periods. And if you want to try a studded tire and you don't want to get both, I would just recommend putting it on the front. It gives you a little bit more traction with that front. If you fishtail in the rear, you can usually self-correct. And this hasn't frozen up yet. We'll go over some things in maintenance to kind of prevent that from happening. Does anybody have any questions about fat bikes or mountain bikes, geared bikes?
You presumably want to lock out a fork if you.
Yeah, I would. Just, we're already struggling in the winter, and so it's nice to give yourself a little boost. Yeah, have less of that be soaked up by your fork. Great. So one that I don't have here, e-bikes are becoming a little more popular. That's also a really good option for winter. It helps you moderate your energy and your temperature, so you sweat less if you choose to do so, which is nice because the sweating is what will cool you down. I would just recommend charging the battery inside if you're storing the bike outside, and keep a spare. So, cool. I had somebody ask a question about carbon online. Is that person here?
That was me.
That was you?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to give you a really unsatisfactory answer, which is you're going to have to check with your manufacturer on the bike. What I will say is that although carbon is very light, and they do make fat bikes and winter bikes out of it, the one disadvantage, it's very light. It doesn't have the shrinkage that the other metals do, so steel and aluminum. But the one disadvantage with carbon is that you often don't see the flaws because they can be hidden in various layers, and they tend to fail quickly. So similar to aluminum and similar to titanium, they fail a lot more quickly than a steel bike would. Steel, if and when it does fail, fails very slowly. It bends, it cracks. You usually have time to note it and deal with it before it becomes a problem. So I would just be a lot more thorough with carbon, wiping it down, checking it over, looking at all of your joints. You're looking for any kind of cracking between the tubing, and then just doing, being really vigilant about listening to any new sounds that you hear when you're riding. So, but we have folks riding carbon fat bikes and carbon commuters. So, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm toying around the idea of just getting a winter beater too, another bike.
Yeah, it's this is a little bit of a mix. I do have some fairly nice hubs on here, but if you can get something that you're not going to have to sink a bunch of money into to replace a lot of the components, it might be helpful. But yeah, I would say if you're going to use something on the higher end, just be extra vigilant about maintenance. Otherwise, with the, if you get a beater or something that you're just using for winter, you can, put it to work a little bit more and be a little more relaxed about maintenance schedules.
Lower stress.
Yeah.
Higher price, higher stress.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely. So going over some of the gear, we touched on studded tires, and they do sell stud kits. If you wanted to make your own stud patterns, you can also replace them. And mountain, really great for snow. You can reverse the tread on mountain bike tires to give you a little more bite in the snow. And then with the road, if you're not running studs and you want to use road tires, they do now make a 27 by 1 1/4 studded tire, which is steel, not carbide, but a lot for folks that are riding old, 70s, mountain or road bikes and have 27-inch tires, you can get studded tires for those now too, which is great.
I thought I was reading that the skinnier tires, if you're on ice, are actually going to be better because they bite in more.
A little bit. Yep, and they cut through a little bit better. Yeah. I would still take a little bit of the pressure out. So you don't ever want to go below the minimum inflation, the recommended PSI, but letting out some of that tire pressure gives you a little bit more contact with the road. So you're just going to have a lot more contact to soak up the extra ice. It's not going to be as bad as having like a, mountain bike tire, because you do have all those knobs on it, and that can slide around a little bit. This slides a little bit on ice, whereas this feels very stable. Any questions about tires?
And is that about 55 on a road bike, on a 27 or a 700?
Yeah, you want to go by what's on your sidewall.
Yeah.
So if it says your minimum is 60, don't go below that. But yeah, if if it says to go down to 45, you can certainly go down to 50, 55. Mm-hmm. I let out a little at a time until I feel a little bit more stable. Pedals. You do have a few options for pedals. These are both platform pedals because I personally ride in my winter boots, which are mucklucks. I did bring, we do have they do make, and this we'll get into a little bit more with clothing, but does anybody in here ride SPDs or?
I have tow baskets.
Okay, tow baskets. Great.
They do get kind of annoying sometimes.
Yeah, and I will occasionally put baskets on this one because it does help pull up a little bit. So there's a bunch of companies out there that make great winter boots with SPDs. In the winter, I just haven't committed. I clip in the summer. And so I do have pedals that can convert to SPD. And for that, what I usually do is I just put like neoprene booties over them. And so we've got a few examples here, but these go over your SPD shoes.
What's an SPD?
Oh, sorry. It's one brand of clipless pedal so that you can click in and then you are able to have that solid contact with your pedal. And then to get out, you twist it. So some folks get a little nervous in the winter because you do have to unclip and get out. Everyone I know has fallen, including myself, in the summer even.
Yeah.
And it can be one more thing. It can ice up, and it's metal. So metal will leach cold into the bottom of your foot, which is why I tend to prefer just going with winter boots and plastic platforms. These metal pedals haven't really caused me to feel the cold through the boots, and they've got a little bit of spikes that'll help just keep traction with the boots so I'm not slipping off. But if you wanted to use your road shoes or something that clips into the pedals, these have the hole to allow that while keeping the rest of your shoe warm. So, and they work really great to stop the wind. So clipless is one option. Platform would be another. I would go wider because your boots are usually bigger in the winter. You're going to have more surface to grip onto. And then toe straps or baskets is a nice option if you want to wear your favorite boots and you don't want to clip in, but you do want a little bit more engagement with those pedals. Just make sure that they're loose enough so you can get your boots in and out while you're riding and you're not getting stuck.
Do you have an example of those hybrid pedals?
The flip-flops?
Yeah.
I don't with me.
Okay.
Basically,
Do you have one that you recommend?
I have Shimano flip-flop pedals, and it's the ones that I have I use for bike touring, and this is so long distance touring, like multi-state touring, because when I'm camping, I like to have the shoes that I clip in with for riding all day, and then the second I get to camp, I want to wear sandals. And so they're flat on one side, and then the other side has the SPD, so you can clip in on one, and then you just let the pedal flip over, and you could just use whatever shoes you want on the other side. It's also nice for work if you don't want to always have to bring an extra pair of shoes. Yeah, it's on the touring bike. Did not bring the touring bike today. But if you look online, they do have a few options. There's one that's more of a mountain style, and then there's one that's more of like a smooth road style. I would say if you're using it for winter, you'd want to go with the more mountain style that has a little more grip, so it can keep your boot on. Does anybody have questions about pedals?
I did have a question online about,
Sure.
If you happen to know, they asked what was the brand that makes the 27-inch, I would imagine they're asking about 27.5-inch studded tire. Do you happen to know?
So I was talking about 27 by 1.25, which is also rare, but if they're looking for a 27.5,
So
that's,
maybe it is 27.
it's,
By 1.25, do you know what brand that?
I don't,
Simple Google
it's,
search.
I believe I just sent an email to somebody about it the other day. It's one brand, and it's really the only one you can get. And so if you go to any bike shop, it'll usually be the one option. But it's a distributor that most of us can order it from. So I had a friend in Canada asking, and they had a shop up there that was wondering, and it's the only one that, as far as I know, currently exists. But it's fairly affordable. And I can, if you want to forward that on to me, I can easily send it out when I get back to work.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So lights are very important in the winter. It is in Minneapolis, you have to have a front light and a rear reflector. I would say in the winter, both lights are best if you can have a front light and a rear light, multiples if possible. And the laws are that you need lights to be seen by cars. I would also say in the winter it's nice to have something you can that also helps you see. So there's several options. You've got dynamo, which is the electricity is generated by you pedaling with your hub. Battery life is a little bit shorter in the cold, so you want to bring spares or chargers for batteries. And then they also have USB. So for the USB, you just want to remember to charge them overnight and bring them inside. Does anybody have specific questions about lights?
Oh, right. I mean, I looked at some headlights and wow, is there ever, some of them just seem like they're meant to cut through concrete or something. They seem so bright. It's just,
Yeah,
how many lumens do we really need?
You know, I actually have used bulkier, brighter lights in the past, and I feel like it was just a little bit of overkill, and they were bulky and they slipped a lot, and I had to constantly remember to bring them in, and the plastic clips would break, or I just didn't want to, for some reason, deal with it, and so I've been using these for about 2 years. These are Blackburns, and they are front. The reason I use these is because they can be front or rear. And so I usually have a few with me. They're easy, they're rubber, so that you can clip them on. They're easy to get off with gloves. And they're fairly bright. I usually will put 2 on the front, 1 on each side of my handlebars, and then 1 in the rear. And this, people can see me just fine. This actually gives me a lot of visibility.
For you being able to see me?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. I also use them. I keep my lights on even if it's daytime, if it's precipitating. So if it's sleeting or snowing and it's daytime, I still use my lights just because the visibility is a little more compromised for cars. So these are like, I can't remember how much these are, but you can buy them in a pack of 2, and I feel like they're a step up from just like your really basic lights. You do want something, and I can check the lumens on these and try and give some folks some feedback. But as long as you can see, I don't think you don't need to get anything super high powered. You just want to make sure that you can see over snowbanks, what's in front of you. Black ice is probably the one thing that's the trickiest. So lights can really help with that too, and allow you to slow down a little bit before you stop. So carrying things, bags, panniers, and baskets. Usually in the summer I use panniers and racks. In the winter, I usually carry a backpack or a messenger bag. Whatever works for you all is great. Some of the advantages of the racks and the panniers is that your center of gravity is a little bit lower. And it makes some people are more comfortable without having to carry anything. For me, I like the extra warmth, and it also allows me to put like drinks and batteries and things in the bag, and it's on my person. They also work with any bike, so if you're switching bikes, it's nice to just have your bag. But if you have a dedicated commuter with a rack setup, a lot of folks really like not having to carry anything on their shoulders, especially for long commutes.
I was suspecting that, well, I had my back was really killing me. I had a pack on. It was a day hiking pack, the belt, and then the stirrup straps. And I was suspecting that going over all these bumps, this pack was bouncing up and down on my back, and it was about 20 pounds. And
yeah, it's nice
I don't like wearing a pack at all.
It's nice to let your bike do the work for you.
St. Paul pavement too.
What was that?
St. Paul pavement.
Yeah, there are some bumps that come out of nowhere. Wham! Oh!
Yeah. So I would just, if you're going to be riding in the winter and you're going to be using panniers, waterproof, ideally. They will get wet. Ortlieb makes a great waterproof pannier that I love. I've used them for years. So I would definitely look for something that's going to be weather resistant. Because that slush is going to come up from the bottom and get onto the bottom of them.
Speaking of that, I just saw an ad for REI. They have the all Ortlieb panniers, like 20% off or something.
Yeah.
It's not the coupon. It's like the whole brand.
Yeah. And they last for a very long time. I highly recommend those panniers. So some things that I do recommend carrying with you in the winter, just to have on your person, would be a multi-tool that's appropriate for your bike. With basic Allen setups, chains, tools, screwdrivers in case you need to do any kind of quick maintenance on the side of the road. Tire levers in case you have to fix a flat. Pump or a CO2 system, whatever you're using for your bike. Wrench, whatever is needed for wheel removal if you don't have quick releases. I like to bring a spare tube because it's faster. I don't want to have to patch something on the side of the road in 20 below. So I throw a new tube in, take the other one home, and I used to pour myself a glass of wine and then fix it. These days it's hot cocoa. And then I just fix them at home. It's also easier to fix a flat with adhesive when it's not cold outside and wet and snowy. So I do like to bring just a pair of thin latex gloves that I always have with my kit, because when it's cold out, you can wear the latex gloves and it's going to keep you a little bit warmer because it's going to block wind, and you're going to have the dexterity to be able to work on your bike. If you're wearing choppers or mittens or lobster claws or something like that, it's really nice to have a thin layer or latex gloves underneath that you can put on to do any kind of maintenance. And then I usually bring a lighter or some lock de-icer or Tri-Flow in case anything freezes up, especially if you're using a U-lock. I would also just say basic maintenance for your U-lock is to put Tri-Flow or some any kind of like a graphite powder to make sure that that's not getting frozen in the winter. And then if you want, you can bring extra rack and fender nuts and bolts, toe straps, zip ties, bungee cords, anything you might need to like secure things to your bike a little bit extra. So as far as toolkits that you bring, does anybody have anything else that they bring with them when they commute that they want to add to the list? Those are some basics that I like to have on me. Emergency gear. Just there's always a chance that you could break down. Often I'm riding late at night and commuting, so cell phone, making sure it's charged just in case. Battery pack, just you can get those like small ones that you can carry with you that can charge your phone. I like to keep them in a bag or inside of your jacket because if they're outside they'll get cold and wear down faster. Energy bars or snacks that don't get too hard in the cold. Water. I tend to bring a metal thermos with me that is usually filled with something hot, even if it's just like hot water with lemon. But this, I don't think I've got cages on these. This I usually just throw in my bag, but it does fit in a bottle cage. And I really encourage drinking electrolytes in the winter, whether that's something store-bought like Moon tablets or a Scratch, and we'll get into this more with hydration. I like to drink soup broth a lot because it's salty, and I find water to be boring. And when it's cold outside, I drink less of it. So a lot of us in the wintertime drink less water. We don't stay as hydrated, so it's nice to have something warm with you. I usually bring hand warmers. Does everyone, I think I've got those right in here. I do have a few, I have my multi-tool that I bring. If folks want to take a look at this afterwards. And then I do have my rubber gloves here. And then these little hand warmers, which my dad gives us every Christmas, are wonderful, actually. Depending on what kind of gloves you're wearing. I used to just wear snowboarding gloves, and they have a small zipper pouch that you can actually put a hand warmer in. And it does a great job of keeping your hands, the front part of your hands warm, which are going to be the thing that is getting hit most by wind. So I highly recommend throwing these in your bag and bringing them with you. Also, if you do have to stop and work on your bike, and your hands are getting cold, these are great for just, getting your hands warm enough to finish up a repair and get back on the road. Also, I just always bring cash for cab, bus, food, just in case. Know your bus routes. So if you do get stranded, you can get home safely. And then for home care, I usually, if you're working on home, you have space at home, I usually have a chain tool, Allen wrench set, at the very least a 4, 5, and 6, open and box end wrenches, cone wrenches for hub adjustments, some degreaser. You can also use just dish soap and water for a degreaser if you want. Chain lube. In the winter, we've got some wet lubes, and I've got some examples for that we can go over. Heavy marine grease, so something like Park Tool or Fill Wood. This is going to displace water, so this is really nice to have at home. Also, anytime you're switching components, so putting pedals on, you're always going to want to use a thicker grease for that to coat those threads. Rags, if you're running disc brakes and you have disc rotors that you're taking care of, you want to make sure you've got some alcohol and some lint-free rags. Most of the shop rags are cleaned in like kerosene and chemicals, and they can contaminate your rotors. So the salt and the ice is already contaminating your rotors. So making sure that you've got some rubbing alcohol. Is anyone riding disc brakes in here? Great. Just a reminder, you don't want to touch them with your hands because the oils from your fingers can contaminate the pads. If you do, it's not a big deal. Just make sure to go over it with alcohol before using your brakes.
Can you repeat what you said about shop rags? They had something on.
They're often cleaned in a chemical. So you're
talking about the cloth?
Like the red ones, or if you're getting like a shop cloth service. So like if you go to a shop, like we have a DIY room that a lot of people use, and we stock it with just basic shop rags. But when people are working on disc brakes, we'll give them their disposable lint-free cloths that you want to use for disc rotors. Shop gloves are handy to have, and then just for your own cleanup, some gritty soap. In a pinch, you can use some brown sugar and dish soap, and that works wonders. It smells good. Anybody? Yeah.
Oh, is there anything you do to your pads, non-disc, the rubber in the winter? I don't know, anything special to.
I clean the rim.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that you deglaze the rim, and the pads themselves. If they look good, I leave them be. If they are, you can always sand them a little bit with some emery cloth or sandpaper. The ones here, I don't have any problems with them, and I just replace them when they get worn down. Are you having problems, or have you noticed anything impacting?
No, I don't know. I guess just for a little extra grip with all the ice and stuff. I don't know. And then just clean the rim with like a dish soap or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, you want to make sure to get all the residue off. So you can use alcohol for that too. You do want to make sure that you're keeping all of the pivots for your brake lubed with, something really thin and viscous like Tri-Flow, which is a Teflon-based lubricant. It's pretty thin, so that you can actuate the brakes. I also like to drip Tri-Flow inside between that cable and the cable housing. to keep your cables from freezing up. So that'll help make sure that your braking stays pretty crisp.
Tri-flow?
Tri-flow. Mm-hmm.
It's a good product.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it works great. And you know, the main thing that can happen, because you know rim brakes are going through a lot of that slush and salt and sand stuff, can start to build up on the rim. But I so far have not had problems with them. So
They don't make like special winter pads or anything.
they do make salmon colored pads. So Cool Stop is a brand, and they make a salmon pad that's a little softer compound, and it does a little bit better in wet conditions. It does wear a little faster because it is a little more supple, but those do a really good job in like rainy spring weather and winter. Yeah.
I had a couple of questions from online. So you mentioned in a pinch for grease, dish soap and
For degreaser.
degreaser.
Yep.
So dish soap and
Water.
brown
Just
dump sugar.
so the degreaser is for your bike.
Yeah.
Because like if you have to clean the chain, you can just mix water and dish soap.
Yep.
The brown sugar and water is for your hands.
Oh.
So it's like
Like a pumice.
a pumice
Pumice
soap.
hand cleaner.
Yep.
Okay.
So we have stuff at work with walnuts in it. I used to work at a fine dining restaurant after my bike mechanic shift, and it was a struggle to get my hands presentable to serve customers food. And I went to the shop, and they usually had like a brush, and we couldn't find it, and so I just had one of the cooks hand me a bunch of brown sugar, and that did the trick. And now that's what I use at home. So it smells good, soft. So yeah.
Sure. Inexpensive, I guess.
Yep.
And then you mentioned maintaining a lock. So if you're using, a lock every day during the week, how often would you recommend looping that lock with the tri-flow or
I would do weekly.
weekly?
Especially, I mean, if it's nice and you haven't had a lot of precipitation, then you could let it go. Anytime you start to feel it, usually you can start feeling that key click as you're turning it. Anytime you feel like you've had to kind of jiggle it a few times to get it to work, I would put either the graphite powder or the tri-flow in to loosen it up to make sure it's not going to lock up on you. And if you can, some of them have a little switch that you can close, which I really like about. This is just a very inexpensive U-lock, but it closes over the keyhole.
Yeah.
And so this is really nice if it's snowing or sleeting outside. That keeps a lot of the extra moisture from getting inside. So I really like that option if your locks have one. So hasn't locked up yet. So
Thank you.
yeah, you're welcome.
Question on degreasing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you use degrease your chain and whatnot, and then clean that off, what do you recommend tri-flow then on the chain
No,
afterward, or what do you?
I recommend, I brought a few examples, so I can kind of, and we can probably put these, if you all, actually we can pass these around. So I brought 3 different brands of winter lube that we use at the shop. I've got tri-flow too, if people want to take a look at that. So winter lubricant is a little bit different than summer lubricant. Summer lubricant is a little thinner, more viscous. The winter lube will last a little bit longer, so it's going to not be displaced as quickly by sleet, snow, salt. This is what I would use. So Pedro's makes a Sin Lube, which is what we usually at the shop alternate between the Rock and Roll and the Pedro's Sin Lube. And then we switch to Summer Lube in the summer. So Rock and Roll makes a gold, and then Pedro's also makes more of like a yellow colored Summer Lube. So if you all want to pass these around, this is what I would recommend for chains. Because it is a little bit thicker. Tri-Flow is a much thinner Teflon-based lubricant. Applications for this are going to be anything on your bike that needs to move or pivot. So pivot points on your derailleur, both front and rear. If you don't know where those are, you can quickly just push on it, and wherever it's moving, wherever those pivot points are, you're just going to put a drop on each of those. Any kind of small fastener. So like your limit screws, you're gonna put a drop of tri-flow to make sure that, when that water and salt settles in there, it's not rusting. Brake levers need to pivot. You can use it for bottle cages. So anything on basically if it moves, put tri-flow on it. If it's supposed to move and doesn't, I would replace it and grease it before you put it in. So when you're doing like your pre-winter maintenance, I like to take all my fasteners out, and then I can hand this around to you. This is your marine grease. So this is the thicker grease. This is going to be used for bottle cage, bolts, installing pedals, hubs, repacking bearings. You always want to take out your seat post and your stem, grease them before winter riding. Anything that you coat with this, it's going to displace water and keep it from rusting and seizing. So it'll keep a lot of the water outside of your frame. The other thing I like to do if you're doing some pre-winter maintenance, this is Frame Saver. And if you are doing a major project or an overhaul, I really like to apply this to the inside of steel frames because it keeps it from rusting from the inside. Outside, I usually just use like a polish. You can use car wax, but it's just a nice coating to keep the weather off of it. So we are getting close to time. So I do have I have some more maintenance stuff that we could go over as far as like weekly, annually. We've got a lot of rooting, handling, nutrition, and clothes. Do folks have any other questions about maintenance? Maybe we can skip ahead and come back if we wanted. Maintenance questions?
I did have someone ask about Frame Saver for aluminum.
For aluminum, don't usually use it for aluminum. Aluminum doesn't have the rusting problems like you will have with like steel chromoly frames. So I don't think it's necessary. Yeah.
On a steel bike, is it worthwhile? I kind of thought about, Frame Saver, I just use engine fogging oil. It's kind of a cheap version. It does the same thing.
Okay.
But is it crazy to just like maybe wipe down the whole outside of the bike with it? With
Frame Saver?
Something to keep corrosion off the outside.
Yeah, I usually do. That's what I usually use, like a polish for, or a wax.
Oh, okay.
So you can use car wax.
Okay.
We have something called Bike Lust, and that's what we tend to use at the hub, and that just gives it a really nice coating.
It's a hard wax?
It's a liquid.
Oh, okay.
But you can use a hard wax in the winter.
Okay.
We use it year round.
You can use that on metal components and stuff like that.
Usually just use it on the frame.
Okay.
Components, I usually don't do much other than tri-flow because I really want it to be thin and get into where it needs to move. The one thing with old grease, if you have a bike that hasn't been overhauled in a long time, the thicker the grease, the harder it can get in the winter. So when those temperatures get really cold, if you notice that you're getting some drag in the hubs, it might be worth checking to see if you need to repack the bearings. If it's really old grease, it can get really solid in cold temps and give you a little bit more resistance. Right. Any other maintenance tips? I would say on a weekly basis, wipe down the bike, knock any of the slush and snow off, clean it and re-lubricate everything if you can. If you're ideally you're storing it kind of in the same temperature. So if you're riding it a lot, you want to store it cold storage like a garage or an unheated basement. You're not getting that freeze-thaw cycle that way, and that can really help a lot too.
One of the questions I had asked.
Sure.
I don't have an outside storage option.
Okay.
I have to bring it in.
Yeah.
Which I don't like.
Right. So in that case, I try to knock everything off the bike before I bring it in the house. And then when I get it inside, you just want to wipe it down really good, because if you bring it in with snow and then it goes into a warm house, the snow is going to melt, and usually you're going to get a lot of that snow and slush around your drivetrain. And then it can start to, what it usually does is it'll start to corrode some of your ferrules on your cables, and then some of your fasteners, like for your cable mounting bolts and stuff like that. So I would just say if you are bringing it in and out with different temperatures, be really diligent about wiping it down and cleaning it off. You always want to check your air pressure. Usually if you just think of like the ABCs, so, you know, anytime you're going to take it out, just check that you've got tire pressure, you know, check your brakes, make sure that they're working smoothly before you leave the house, and then check your chain for rust, and clean and lubricate if needed. And then, you know, weekly, that's when I'll go over all the pivot points and write down the frame a little more diligently with like a bristle brush. And then usually monthly, I'll do a little more thorough check I'll check my bearing systems and tires. At the end of the winter, I'm not always great about this. It sometimes takes me a few months, but at the end of the winter, if you can just try to go over the bike and do the monthly checklist, clean it up, re-lube everything. Otherwise, the salt and the rust really sets in when it sits for a long time. If you want, you can overhaul the bearings. If you want a bonus round, you can take off your tire, your tube, and your rim strip, and then clean off the inside of that of your rim, because a lot of times you'll get corrosion on where the spoke nipples meet the spoke on the inside, and that way you'll be able to adjust your tension and true your wheel in the future without them being corroded. So, any other questions about maintenance? Great. Handling. We're going to just do a really brief one so we can get through this. So often what happens in the winter is, as you may well know, the bike lanes disappear on shared paths because they become snow depositories. And so you have narrower lanes, decreased visibility, slippery surfaces. You really just want to slow down, give yourself more time. You need a lot more time to brake because of those slippery surfaces. So you want to start slowing down with your pedals if you can before having to stop fast and hit the brakes. The safest place to ride if you lose your bike lane is going to be in the right tire track. You do want to signal with your left hand if you are going to be moving out into traffic. Hopefully folks are paying attention and are patient. We do have the right to take the lane. So cyclists are allowed to be in the street, if that's something that you feel comfortable doing, it is within your legal right. You just want to stay visible, stick to your line, and be predictable. So always signaling to traffic so that they know what you're about to do. And then I would say if you haven't ridden in winter before, practice. You have a new bike, new setup, new gear. Make sure you take it out on a less traveled road or parking lot to get used to the bike and see how it handles. I would give yourself a little bit extra time to get to your destination, like 5 minutes for every 3 miles or so. You just want to take slower, wider turns. So you're not going to be cornering as much because that can allow your weight to shift and the bike can slip out from underneath you. So you really do want to stay upright and you're turning with your whole body and staying loose and relaxed. If you do start to fishtail, rather than making like fast, wild corrections, you just want to keep pedaling forward and make small corrections to try and get through the snow. Usually if you keep pedaling and kind of steer through it, you'll get your traction back and you can keep going. Does anybody have any questions about handling? Okay. We've got 1 minute. So routing, I know some folks had questions about. I do have some stuff on the resources for routing. I would say, well-lit roads with ample street lamps, well-marked positions. Know your snow emergency routes. The city has information about what they're going to plow first. And so you might just have to decide between riding on backs, if you have tires that can handle a lot of snow and you don't like traffic, maybe going on some of the roads that might have a little bit of intersection snow. If you feel comfortable riding next to traffic, the busier roads on the main thoroughfares are going to get plowed first. And then everybody falls in the winter, but you have more clothes and it's snowy, I would try not to worry about falling. And if you do, you want to tuck and roll. Don't brace yourself. Relax. Get yourself out of the road first, and then worry about the bike if you are riding next to traffic.
It's an expensive bike.
Leave the bike if you have to. And then as far as clothes, you've just got the 3 W's. So wicking, you want your base layer to be tight against your body, pull sweat away. Warmth is the middle layer. You want something fuzzy, fluffy with like trapped air. So wool and fleece are really great options. And please avoid cotton at all costs. Cotton kills. It will, if you sweat in it, it will cool you down. So please try not to wear it. And then the wind stopper is the final outer layer. So you want something that's going to be weather resistant, a shell, something with pit zips and venting so you don't overheating when you get to work. And with gloves, it's the same. Usually a thin liner glove with something more bulky on the outside, like a big chopper, or I really like, these are from work. I usually use choppers, which are something like this, and they're stuck to this thing. We'll get that later. These are just really big and bulky. So if you're not worried about shifting, you can use something like this if you're just braking. For shifting and braking, the lobster claws give you a little more dexterity, but they pair your fingers up for warmth. And then you can wear like liner gloves underneath them. And then I would just say, and then these are pogies. So these go on your handlebars, they stay on your bike, and they keep your handlebars warm, which is really nice, but then it means you can also wear whatever gloves you want, and you're just putting them inside of this, and it has a lot of trapped air, so it's really nice for keeping your hands warm in the winter. Okay, I know you all have to get back to work.
Yes, we do. Unfortunately, it is just after 1. I want to thank Casey for coming in. I wish we had more time to talk about all there is, because there's a lot of material to cover.
There's a ton.
So could we give you that? For those online, if they want, you have a handout in the class. If they want that handout, maybe they could email me and I could send that to them. My email is owen.seltz@state.mn.us.
And I'll send it to you. And if any of you would rather have the links, you can click on the links. You can get it from Owen too.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Casey, where's the hub located?
We have 3 locations. I work mostly at the Minnehaha location, so it's 3016 Minnehaha, right on Lake and Minnie in South Minneapolis. And then we have a smaller location at the West Bank, which is right next to Midwest Mountaineering, if you're all familiar, over in Cedar Riverside. And then our 3rd location is the hub at Oak Street, which is our U of M, for the U of M bike shop. So it's a very small, mostly, it's mostly a repair shop, but we do have a few bikes, and they are located in the parking ramp on Oak Street, right on the East Bank of campus. I do have business cards, so.
Are these classes all at the main shop?
The classes are all at Minnehaha. And so if you look on our calendar, we have all of them listed. And the winter one is free. Some of them are paid. And I have those business cards, but they're in my pocket. So we do have all of the information online for classes. The winter class is about an hour. They'll cover some of the things I went over. It is a smaller class, so you do get to ask a few more questions. And then we're in the shop, so you can kind of get a few more hands-on like demos of what you're doing with it. And these are just generic cards, but these have all the locations.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you all so much for coming. If folks don't have to get back to work right away, I'm happy to stay and answer some questions if people have them or show off some gear. Otherwise, feel free to email Owen if you have any other follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
happy commuting.
Warm
Thanks.
Thanks.